Welcome to the Grand Prix 24/7 podcast, your weekly insight into the world of Formula One. Hello and welcome to the Grand Prix 24/7 podcast. I'm your host Will, and as always I'm joined by Paul Velasco, Editor-in-Chief at Grand Prix 24/7, and contributor Jad Malak. Today we're going to be reviewing the Bahrain Grand Prix, a thrilling race to start off the 2021 season. And yeah, I think finally we got that battle between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton that we've been craving, Paul.
Always last year it was a bit of a David versus Goliath. Max with a car that wasn't quite up to the Merc spec versus the Mercedes. This year, if the first round to go by, Max versus Lewis is basically box office stuff we've all been waiting for. And on the night they delivered, I call it a slugfest because they did. They slugged it out. Although a comment in our report said, well, it wasn't really a slugfest. Well, they were trading lap for lap times. And if you consider about 15 laps to go, Max came into the pits and had to pull a 10-second gap on Lewis. And he did. He actually reduced it to the point that he could overtake. So that to me is slugging it out. They might not be side by side, but, Lewis was watching his times, watching the mirrors, watching everything, and Max was just coming. And I think the Red Bull have got a fine car. Honda have done their homework, and I think it's probably the best Honda engine they've ever produced, and it's probably up there with Merc. Definitely the noises coming out of Toto Wolff camp is that they need just to find a faster car. So congrats to Red Bull. And with Max, we've always known he has the firepower, and Lewis is supreme. So it's almost like the immovable wall meets the unstoppable object, and I think that's going to be the story of the 2021 season.
Yeah, Jad, the balance between the two teams is fascinating. I think it's clear that Red Bull have the edge in qualifying trim, but perhaps it's a little bit more even when it comes to race pace.
Yeah, first of all, thank you guys for having me here today. Yeah, it was a fascinating start for the season, actually. Everyone was wondering about the relative pace of the cars from preseason testing up to the first race. So yeah, I agree. Red Bull seemed to have the fastest car on a Saturday. Max outqualified Lewis by almost 4/10, and that's not a small margin to consider. But overall, Mercedes seemed to have a well-balanced car on race day, and it was friendly enough to help them execute the strategy. What I felt, from the race is that really Mercedes showed their colors as a winning team. They're a well-oiled winning machine. They knew they had some disadvantage compared to Red Bull, and they just went about their business quietly. They put this, they planned this amazing strategy. It was a bit risky, but they went for it, and Lewis just executed impeccably, and that's why they won the race. They just know how to win, and even if they don't have the faster car, and that was evident during the race. On the other side, Red Bull, I think, they've, for the first time in years, they have a car which is just plug and play. It's a very fast car. Max seems happy with it, and Max was at his best on Sunday as well. The final part of the race when he was chasing down Lewis, it was just amazing. Very gripping to watch. Too bad it had to be decided in the end by the risk of him getting the penalty, so he had to give the place back. But in general, great stuff from both drivers.
Paul, I think that we can't kind of move on from this topic without discussing the Turn 4 incident. Obviously, at this point, Lewis Hamilton throughout the race has been kind of abusing track limits at Turn 4, but they said they weren't going to monitor them. Red Bull then put in a message to Max to tell him that Lewis is taking more advantage at Turn 4 than he has been, and that he should start doing it. The FIA then tell both teams that the drivers need to stop going wide at Turn 4, and then Verstappen completes the pass, which ultimately has to cede back to Hamilton by running off the track at Turn 4. We can all be in agreement that passes shouldn't be made off the track. The big question is why Hamilton was allowed to consistently go off the track earlier in the race.
Michael Massey and the FIA got it wrong. I mean, they had a rule, and they broke the rule, and the Red Bull could do it, and Lewis could do it. Lewis apparently went over more than 20 times over that area, but again, he didn't get a position. I just think that grey area cost us a very, very good race. It cost us what I think would have been a fantastic finale, and I hope they just get their maths right in future. As far as I'm concerned, track limits are the white line. As soon as you've got 4 wheels over the white line, it's not right. It's a penalty. That's how I look at it. It's like soccer. When the ball goes out, as long as the ball's on the line, it's not out. But as soon as it's a few millimeters out of the line, it's out. It's simple. And that's how Formula One should be. There wouldn't have been none of that confusion. I think FIA confused themselves. They said, that's the white line. I don't care what happens. You stick to it. A track is a track. Where do you draw the line? If you say, oh, well, he can do it there, but he can't do it in turn 14 or whatever. So FIA blundered big time, and they better get their act together, because there's going to be a lot more of these close racing, big decisions have to be made.
Yeah, I totally agree. It doesn't really matter, as far as I'm concerned, what the solution is. I just want it to be clear and consistent and understood by everyone. Jad, just before we move on specifically from this battle, I just want to get a quick thought on how this progresses. Do you see Red Bull still being the fastest car come Imola in 3 weeks' time?
Look at the development that Mercedes has done in the couple of weeks from preseason testing up to the race. They just went back and analyzed all the data and just came back with a improved car. 3 weeks till Imola, I think Mercedes are going to be working very hard just to close the gap. And I think they may have a chance to do that. Especially that Wolf has been talking about, Toto Wolff has been talking about some innovation they're going to introduce to the car. So you never know what they have up their sleeves. It's going to be interesting. Honestly, I hope that they close the gap. Then the fight will be much more intense for the rest of the season.
Yeah, indeed. I think it's going to be a fascinating one to follow. And just in terms of the second drivers on both of those teams, Paul, Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez had issues, different for each of them. Sergio obviously didn't make it through Q2 and then had to start from the back due to a failure kind of on the way to the grid. He did manage to fight back to fifth, while Bottas started third, dropped behind Leclerc on the first lap, and then when he looked like he potentially could have some role to play in strategy, he had a slow pit stop. So what do you make of those two?
Well, Bottas, for sure, he's Bottas, reloaded, unloaded, whatever. He's still going to be number 2 to Lewis. Lewis again showed how he can raise his game. Bottas was unlucky. I mean, I think it's almost like the training car, In comes Bottas for a pit stop and mess it up. Lewis, clean. I'm not saying there's a disparity, but it's kind of like number 2 sort of luck and number 2 treatment there. But whatever, Bottas has to put his head down. He's got a fantastic car. So if he doesn't beat Lewis, he's got to be behind him. That's the reality for Mercedes. In terms of Perez, I think he ticked all the boxes. He was a bit unlucky. I would say that, first of all, they were a bit optimistic in Q2, and he suffered because of that, and he started 11th. And then he had that issue at the start, which was like just a nightmare. I mean, can you believe it? And that you can't blame him unless he hit a switch by mistake. That thing just switched off. You see him driving, and then the screen goes blank. So I think they had a bit of an issue there, which tested Perez's resolve. But he got back, went straight to the pit lane, and he started from the pit lane. He was at the back twice because he came in for a pit stop. And then he started delivering exactly what Perez was hired to do for Red Bull. A steady, hard drive, which saw him go straight up the field. And I couldn't help but make comparisons while I was watching him, just clinically getting past people, no mistakes. Just when he had his moment, he attacked. He lined the guys up, and beautifully, he went right through the field. And I think he delivered what none of his predecessors could. And that's when the chips are down and things are not going good for the team, boom, Perez delivered. And I think that was the first showing of what he's capable of doing and why he was brought into the team.
This is what he needs to do so he can be delivering exactly what Red Bull need. He delivered, I think, the first half of, let's say, his objectives is that he's a safe pair of hands. He drives beautifully through the grid. He didn't panic when his car died on him on the formation lap. And after that, he was just going through the field smoothly. and doing what he just does. That's classic Perez over there. He needs to raise his game in terms of qualifying pace, and I don't know how much he can do that, because historically Perez wasn't really an outstanding qualifier, as we know. So he needs to raise his game in terms of qualifying, because had he been closer to the fight up front, he would have been a factor in this strategic fight between Mercedes and Red Bull. So yeah, he needs to raise his game in quali. Let's see how fast he can do that.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a thing to keep an eye on. And obviously he went with the ambitious strategy of going with the mediums in Q2 and it didn't pay off. But yeah, he needs to make it pay off in the future. Paul, next up we had Lando Norris in fourth, just ahead of Perez. An excellent drive for Lando. And while Daniel Ricciardo was a couple of places back in seventh, it has been revealed that he had some floor damage. So a pretty impressive outing for McLaren, don't you think?
Yeah, very much. I mean, Lando Norris just continues to impress with every outing. He was fantastic this weekend. Normally he's a bit slow off the marks, but he's been to this track before. He's no longer, he's experienced now. And I think he just delivered high-end stuff. He had Daniel Ricciardo, who's no slouch, chasing him all weekend. So yeah, that team's looking good. It's probably third on the pecking order with Ferrari thereabout. But definitely McLaren bolted on those Merc engines, and they've proven to be, the real deal. And if you look where Aston Martin is and where Williams is, you got to say that the transition from Renault power to Mercedes power over the course of the winter has gone as good as can be. And I'd say Zach Brown would be a happy man. I mean, as a McLaren fan historically myself, I'm very pleased to see the team the way it is. And Norris just keeps on hitting home runs. And I think Daniel will get into the groove. He wasn't as bad as, let's say, Seb compared to, I'm talking about the drivers that came into new teams. He'll take a bit of time to adjust himself. But I think they've got two fine drivers, and I'm looking forward to a good season for McLaren.
And Jad, I think before the season we would have said that it was maybe Alpine and Aston Martin who would have been McLaren's biggest rivals for that best of the rest spot, but perhaps it's Ferrari. Obviously, by their incredibly high standards as a team, a 6th and an 8th place finish isn't amazing, but it's a little bit of progress, I think, from last season.
Yeah, well, we saw Ferrari this weekend, a place that, honestly, I feel it shouldn't have been there. Leclerc always flatters the car, his performance is just amazing. He just drives the wheels of that car. He did the same this weekend. I think Sainz's position at the end of the race would have been more representative of what Ferrari are. But regardless, they have done some progress over the winter, and honestly, it was their only way. They couldn't be worse than last year. Honestly, with that power unit they had, with that draggy car they had, it was just a disaster. So the only way for them was forward. Now, let's see how they go forward in their season. Are they going to develop the car? I think I read today that Binotto said no, we're not going to develop the car. So we need to see how they progress over the season. I'm hoping that maybe they can get a bit better and just bring the fight to McLaren. McLaren are now just sitting there solidly in the third spot. Their progress has been steady and impressive, honestly, and it's good to see them there. I have to agree with Paul. It's good to see them there. They're looking well placed to even get better. But Ferrari, it just depends how they decide to develop the car or not, how they operate. And they have two of the best drivers on the grid. I hope that they just don't get those drivers frustrated.
I think that's a really important point, because Leclerc's shown that he can win races with the right machinery. Paul, do you have a take on Ferrari?
Of course I've got a take on Ferrari. They're a disgrace. So the team should be winning races every time they go onto the track. So yeah, I'm going to say Ferrari were a big disappointment for me. More so because, as Jad says, in Leclerc they've got a guy who can really take the bull by the horns and put this car places where it shouldn't be, like he did in qualifying. And again, as Jad says, I think Sainz is more representative of where that car really is. And I have no faith in Ferrari developing a car, let alone developing a cold. They last year they sat with a rubbish car for the whole season. The car was the difference between them and their current state is Mercedes are in trouble. Again, as Jad says, they'll go home, spend 3 weeks on the car, and they'll find a couple of seconds or a second, or they'll sort out their problems. Red Bull the same. Historically, they've always been slow off the blocks, but by the time the car comes to the end of the season, it's almost the best car on the grid. This year, fortunately for them, they've started with a great car, so I see that car evolving. Ferrari have thrown in the towel a long time ago and said in 2022 we'll be back on the podium. It's an audacious claim because why? Is everyone going to stop developing their cars and let Ferrari catch up? Ferrari are deluded. The leadership is non-existent. Mattia Binotto does not know what he's doing at the helm of that team. He might be a great engineer, but they should handcuff him to a computer that just does engineering stuff. And they really need someone to come into that team and galvanize it. They need a leader. They need someone. I can't tell you who that person's going to be. I'll be outrageous and say Flavio Briatore, but seriously, they need a face to actually push this team, and they need the technical side led by Binotto to get the act together. You got to remember one thing. Binotto was an engineer that was brought in to team principal role. Obviously, when they interviewed him, he said, of course I can do it. He can't. It's clear that he can't because Ferrari should not be starting a season with their cars struggling to make it into the top 5. This is a team, the most successful team in the history of the sport, with the most money, with the most fans. I'm not even a fan and I'm aggrieved.
A team that will certainly be hoping not to go backwards is Alpine. Fernando Alonso had a good race until a sandwich wrapper prevented him from continuing. But Jad, I don't think that Alpine was showing the pace that potentially they would have been hoping for.
Alpine were doing well in the race because Fernando was doing well. If you look at Ocon, his performance also, the same can be applied for Ocon as applied for Sainz. Ocon is more representative of the car space. Alonso, he just pushes the car to the limit, and with his feisty performances, he just also puts the car in places it shouldn't be, especially during the race. I don't know. I think Fernando made a mistake coming back with Alpine, actually. I think he should have went for Mercedes or Red Bull. He doesn't have enough time with them. He's 39 years old. How long will it take them to give him a race-winning car so he can achieve the wins that he deserves? So either Alpine do something magical and turn the corner very soon, or I feel things are going to be becoming very toxic in that team again.
Paul, what are your thoughts on Alonso?
Well, I thought he was mega. He hit the ground running. And despite having said in the season he was fully ready for Formula One and he was, blah, 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 the usual Alonso talk, he found it very difficult. He found the adrenaline and the whole thing. He's in Formula One, mate. This is not World Endurance Championship. This is the real deal. And he felt it and he admitted it, which is cool. So we've got an honest Alonso out there. But at the same time, we all know he took that car and he put it where it shouldn't be. As Jad said, again, Ocon was the measure of that car. And Alonso, of all the guys who came into a new team, has made the guy who's been sitting there for a couple of years look ordinary. So I expect a lot of Fernando, but we all do. He always gives at the highest level. But I fear for Alpine because last year they had a reasonable car for Daniel, but it seems to have sort of stagnated or gone backwards a little bit. And I think while the novelty of being back still probably fueling his ambitions and his desires and everything, once the reality check sits in that he's sitting in a Formula 2 car or Formula 1.5 car, I think we're going to get some Alonso fireworks. And really, to be honest, who does the buck stop with at Alpine? I don't know. Probably Fernando. So anyway, it's going to be good. It's good to have him back. But as Jad said, it's a shame that they haven't given him the car to do the work with. And as he says, if you're not on Mercedes and Red Bull and you're a top driver, even be in Formula One, especially if you're a guy like Fernando.
It seems like there are a lot of teams who go home a little bit disappointed after this opening weekend, and Aston Martin, Sebastian Vettel in particular are one of them. Jad, not the ideal start for Vettel, and I know Lance Stroll managed to salvage a point, but that team looks like it's gone backwards over the off-season.
Yeah, unfortunately, Aston Martin have been a big disappointment. With all the fanfare and all the glittery launches that they've done over the winter season, you would have expected them to come to the first race prepared well. The car seems to be slow. They have reliability problems, and that hampered them a lot during testing, and especially Sebastian. He couldn't get the laps in that he needed to get used to the car. And the result was their poor outing in the first race. Sebastian couldn't qualify well, in addition to the yellow flag incident in Q1. That made things worse for him. But he's not used to the car. He's just saying that he's not at one with the car and he needs some more time. But when the race started, he made up 6 positions on lap 1. That was very good of him. And then he had some tussle with Alonso and Sainz during the race. No spins, no crashes, nothing. And everyone said, wow, okay, maybe Sebastian is back. And then he goes and rams Ocon. Honestly, I'm a fan of this guy. I like him. He's a very nice guy. He's given a lot to Formula One. Everyone respects him. But sometimes I just think, what was he thinking? Just, tucking his car behind Ocon. You're going to lose downforce there. You're going to lock up and crash. And that's what happened. I think it's good for him that we have 3 weeks off now before the second race. Maybe he can go and reflect, and maybe Aston Martin can do some damage control with him, with his state of mind, just support and embrace him. Everyone knows that Sebastian needs that. So hopefully that if Aston Martin supports him properly and he just puts his head in the right place, hopefully we can have him back during the season. But it hurts. It hurts to see him that way.
Well, Aston Martin, first of all, it's fantastic that they're back. Okay, let's not be fooled by it. But for me, the problem is last year they had a car that won a race and had 2 drivers on the podium in that race. And that was the second last race of the season, or third last. It was Sakir, one of those Grand Prix. Anyway, so instead of taking the pink Mercedes and evolving it, especially now that they only need it for 1 year, they rebuilt a whole new car. And I think that's come back and it's going to haunt them. In terms of Lance Stroll, well, he'll deliver. He'll deliver. If the car's fast and good, he'll be up there. If the car's rubbish, he won't be up there. And that was pretty much what we saw. In terms of Seb, well, I think time's run out on Seb. He's got 3 kids, 2 daughters and a boy. He's got a lovely wife. He's got all the money he needs in the world. I think he's probably one of those guys and there's a saying in motorsport that every time you have a kid, you lose half a second. And if you do the maths, that's probably what he's lost. But the worst for me is the brain fade. I need to point out that the decline of Seb has not just been in a year or so. At the end of the 2018 season, we actually awarded him the biggest disappointment of that year because he should have won that world championship and he didn't. And the reality is that makes mistakes and he blames others. He did it with Charles Leclerc last year or 2 years ago in Brazil. This Ocon thing is just rookie stuff. It's absolute rookie stuff. And horror for me is that immediately he blamed Ocon. He said Ocon turned into him. There is no ways. And he was saying that in the cockpit. Ocon just turned into me. There was no turning in. The car went straight, which tells me that maybe when Seb goes into battle, he closes his eyes because he definitely believes that point Ocon turned into him. And Ocon just kept to the left of the track, boom, straight past him. And then Seb tucked underneath him, that wake of air, and boom. And even afterwards, in the media pen, he said, he closed the door on me. Only later, obviously, when he saw it on TV and he had absolutely, that he said, okay, sorry, it was my fault. He didn't even say that. He apologized to Ocon. So I feel that Seb is desperate. He's desperate, and his form is showing that he's desperate. His driving is showing that he's desperate. His body language is desperate. And the sound bites he makes are desperate. So I really believe we've seen the slow, painful decline of a great Formula One career, and it'll carry on this season.
We'll have to wait and see. I'm not going to fully write him off just yet, but the early signs are certainly not too good. 2 quick hits before we go. Jad, quick thoughts on Yuki Tsunoda. Finished 9th on his first race. AlphaTauri obviously qualified 5th in the hands of Pierre Gasly until he had an incident with Daniel Ricciardo on the first lap, which kind of knocked him out of contention. but things are looking good for Tsunoda and AlphaTauri.
Yeah, well, I think it's normal that Gasly out-qualified Tsunoda on the first outing because he's used to the car, he's used to the team, so he should be able to get the best out of the car during quali. But Tsunoda has just shown that he's able to do a clean race. From day one, he just went on his race, no incidents, nothing. Some really nice overtaking, and like consistent pace throughout the race, and that's something impressive. I think he's a very exciting talent, and I'm really excited to see how this guy develops over the years. But yeah, we can expect some really nice stuff from this guy.
And Paul, what about AlphaTauri for you?
Well, Tsunoda, a star is born. Okay, so far he's ticked every box. He's a likable guy. He's super fast. He says all the right things. His overtaking of Alonso, his boyhood hero, is the stuff you can't script. You know what I mean? It was beautiful. I just think he's taken of all the rookies, he's taken the place by storm, and I think everyone is looking forward to see what he does in future races. Like I said, very early days, but he ticked all the boxes.
And finally, let's just get your quick thoughts on Haas. A nightmare weekend for them. Nikita Mazepin spun twice in qualifying and then on the first lap of the race. Mick Schumacher was slightly cleaner but still had a spin of his own. That looks like a really difficult car to drive, and I don't think this season is going to get much brighter for that team.
Last year, two veteran drivers, Kevin Magnussen and Romain Grosjean, did not drive that car. They secretly and behind, and eventually it came out that the thing was absolutely rubbish, and it hadn't been developed since the first test when it first appeared. That's the beginning of 2019. By all accounts, it has not been developed till end of last season or this season. They've painted it, yeah, they made it pretty white and whatever, and some stickers and stuff, but the car is the same bag of shit that they had last year. And now what do? In their wisdom, and I'm talking their wisdom, this is Formula One, okay? We're talking Mick Schumacher, son of Michael Schumacher, who you would imagine would be surrounded by confidants, people with their best interests in heart, such as Ross Brawn, Stefano Domenicali. Everyone that's involved in Formula One needs Mick Schumacher to do well, wants Mick Schumacher to do well. And these guys, this think tank that runs our sport, and that Mattia Binotto, who runs, in inverted comma, Ferrari, put Mick Schumacher in the shit show that Günther Steiner runs. A proper shit show. Those cars are undrivable. Poor Mazepin, he's so out of his depth. He got on the gas on the first lap and the thing spun around. I'm sure they never ran full fuel tanks with those things, because a lap later, Mick does exactly the same thing. He hits the gas and the rear end comes. And then afterwards he said, I was driving at 90%. What a shit show Formula One has allowed Mick Schumacher to start his first season with.
Well, I think that's just about all we've got time for this week. Thank you to both Jad and Paul for their insights. We will be back next week to discuss some of the kind of ongoing storylines surrounding Formula One. Feel free to follow us on social media at Grand Prix 24/7 and visit the website grandprix247.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.